Hi, I'm Carissa. I was interviewed in the book, in Magpie's book. I wrote 2 books originally that one was called Yours for the Revolution. The other one was called May It Come Quickly, like a shaft sundering in the dark. I wanted it to be one big sentence, essentially, because I thought that would be interesting. It was also how people, I had seen a lot of anarchists sign their letters that way, and I always thought it was really pretty. Those books, they were essentially about state control over individuals and communities. The next book uses the same narrator. I kind of like using the same narrator over and over again, or taking characters from one book and kind of moving into other ones. Partially because I already did all the work, and this way I can take it easy because the character's halfway developed. But also because it's interesting to see this person, in this book, which I wrote when I was very young, grow up. And she grows up to discover that one is not just oppressed by state control or authority, but also by corporate control and authority, which is oftentimes legitimized by the very American value of individualism and free will over community well-being, or oftentimes other individuals' free will. So this book brings up many of the complexities, which I believe, this book that I'm working on now, Who's Esperanza, brings up many of the complexities which I believe anarchists seek to resolve. The simultaneous need for individual autonomy and community well-being, civil rights, but also equal distribution of wealth. The original plot is loosely stolen from Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged, which many of you know props up the American value of individualism at the expense of others. Only it's about a bunch of workers taking over a train line and creating their own alternative economy. In the end, the leaders, the corporate leaders, are scrambling and their world collapses. Their world. So I'll start reading until Magpie tells me to stop. Who's Esperanza? He said. To Penelope, the man appeared to be homeless. He stood in front of her, blocking her way. Penelope was racing down Pine Street to get back from her lunch break. The cafeteria at Midwestern Cars had long since closed, and the only 2 restaurants in downtown St. Louis were chain fast food places, or elite overpriced bar and grills, or cafes which charged $14 for something as mundane as a hamburger. Sometimes Penelope would give in to the urge to eat fast food, irritated by the traffic jam drive to Midtown St. Louis for food, but she always felt sick and lethargic by the end of the day, and worst of all, even more depressed about the current state of her life. Penelope achieved none of the things she was supposed to by age 35, and often thought her life empty as a result. No career, no home, no kids, no long-term love relationship, constant economic stability and financial hardship, and she even still lived with her parents. Penelope stared at the homeless person and thought dismally, well, at least I'm better off than him. If anything, I have a warm bed, food, and cable TV to entertain me. Penelope didn't miss her trampish past. From age 14, when she ran away, all the way up to age 25, when she ended up in a psych ward. She hopped on one freight car after the next, slept on strangers' floors or couches or beds, until she was thrown out, ate out of dumpsters, and broke into abandoned buildings. Penelope hung on to abusive relationships with friends and lovers, just for some sense of security, until she simply couldn't take it anymore. One night, she tried to commit suicide, and she was found by a lover who just dumped her, after she took a container full of sleeping pills. The lover, who was a wealthy trust fund kid, brought her to the private hospital psych ward and paid for her to stay 2 weeks. He also contacted her stepfather to come and pick her up. Even if he broke her heart, he saved her life. Penelope tried to see herself as she stared at the homeless person, but discovered she could not really distinguish his features, although his eyes were expressive. Who's Esperanza? He repeated. It was as if he was mocking her. Hastily, she reached into her pocket for change, but found nothing, as if a quarter would fix his problems. Homeless people were everywhere. Penelope noticed their population growing to epic proportions from her days as a tramp. When at first it was an occasional drug addict or alcoholic man, Later, it was entire families. Boxcars would become prime territory, and freight cars were filled to the brim with poor homeless people who traveled south or west when the weather turned cold. "I have nothing today," Penelope said, looking apologetic. "Except this bag of nuts." The homeless man's eyes brightened. Dumpster food was becoming harder to come by because of the scourge of homelessness in the city, and the only soup kitchen in St. Louis still existed often ran out of food before all the guests could be fed. Penelope continued her rush back to work. She dreaded the part of the day when she had to go back to work without reason and purpose. She was used to feeling this way, and often comforted herself by telling herself there would only be 4 more hours left to the day, and then she could go home and watch TV. The homeless person she felt, the only human she saw all day. Everyone else was just a machine, working without thinking, identifying themselves specifically as their job, their position. Have I always felt this way, she thought? Even in the trenches without work? No, she hadn't. She didn't remember when she first started to discover when work and career did not give her the fulfillment she desired. There were times things seemed hopeful. When people she worked with seemed to come alive, or a cute boy worked in the office, or a project had some relevance to the things she desired knowledge of in life. She lived for these momentary intervals and constantly fought the feeling of purposelessness and dread that often came over her. But now she couldn't fight anymore. Dread was everywhere she looked. She could only cover up dread with more dread. She thought of quitting, but what would be the point? She'd just have to get another equally crappy job somewhere else. The sun reflected on the window of the now defunct St. Louis Center. Built to revive St. Louis's crumbling downtown, it only served to make things worse. Penelope used to sleep there when she first ran away. After city gangs took over the mall and a murder took place, nobody went. So many of the stores closed, only to be replaced by jewelry stores and cell phone shops. Penelope remembered when it first opened. It was all white, and its cleanliness, compared to the dinginess of downtown area, brought much-needed glamour into Penelope's youth. She used to go with her friends to try on clothes that did not fit and made her feel grown up. Penelope and her friends would bring in armfuls of clothing to the dressing room and buy nothing. Now the dingy whiteness of St. Louis Center reminded her of the Bible Belt's moral majority, which ruled the country with an iron fist and claimed that for all the government and the market no longer provided, God would. Penelope walked on, reminding herself she was late getting back to work. She did not like having to deal with her ignorant and abusive boss, but she had to. She couldn't delay her situation by slowing down. Only made it worse. She sped up. Penelope turned the corner when she reached the old post office. The mayor of St. Louis had prevented its destruction for yet another year, so that downtown community could feel a sense of beauty and hope in a city that seemed to have lost the fight. The building constantly lost money and cost a lot of money to keep up, but Penelope thought it was worth it. She always liked the sight of the post office. Its preservation to her seemed like an ultimate sign of respect for beauty and workmanship, for resources and history. Across the street was a man selling vegetables. Penelope stared at the colors of the different food, the opulence of the old buildings, and the feeling of the vegetables farmer who sold his goods to workers on their way back to work comforter. Behind the vegetable cart was a block of empty storefronts.